Welcome to Break Free and Trust, a redesign for living. Join me, Chris.
And me, Jacqueline, for real conversations about life, death, and everything in between.
Learn to connect with your intrinsic power to grow and heal, how to laugh at your own humanness and not take life too seriously.
Through healthy conversations between the feminine and masculine, you learn how to harness the power of relationship and the mirror to befriend your shadow and to trust that any obstacle that gets in your way is there to help you grow.
Together, working at a practical level, you'll learn to trust that everything that is happening is for you, your growth, and ultimate freedom.
Our circumstances don't matter. It's only how we relate to them that does.
Get ready to befriend the wisdom of your body and the power of your mind.
Break Free and Trust starts now.
And welcome to Break Free and Trust, a redesign for living. I'm Chris.
And I'm Jacqueline.
And today's show, Jacqueline and I, motivated by our own personal trips abroad, explore the benefits of taking personal time in the context of a healthy relationship. There's you, there's me, and then there's a relationship. And this is the 1 + 1 = 3 dynamic we're going to be talking about today. And each part needs respect, boundaries, love, and energy. So how do we ensure that our own batteries are full so we can show up for the relationship? Are there ways to support our partners in keeping their batteries full? What does it mean to bring that personal energy to the relationship, and how do we do it? This and so much more over the next hour. And as usual, this is a live show. So if you're watching live, type your question into the chat or call in at 1-800-930-2819, and we'll get to those questions in the second half.
Hey, everybody. So Chris, in our introduction, you brought up the analogy of keeping our batteries charged. And that's something that came up for you this morning as we were talking about this podcast. And you came up with an amazing metaphor that I would love it if you would share with these guys.
Yeah, I had this mental image of these 3 batteries. One of the batteries representing one partner in a relationship, the other battery representing the other partner, and then a battery that represents the relationship itself. And this picture I have in my head, and I'm big on these mental images, is that the relationship battery is drawing energy from the 2 other batteries. And so what makes it critical is for the relationship to have energy, to have momentum, the batteries of the partners have to be full and sharing energy into the relationship as a whole, making it this idea that there's, again, as we said in the intro, there's you, there's me, but then there's the relationship. And there are these 3 entities that exist but rely on the 2 partners in a relationship for everything.
I love that. We used to talk a lot about 1 + 1 = 3, and we sort of saw it as a Venn diagram where the 3 was the intersection between the 2. But actually, I like this. I like it even better because it really does mean that if each person in a relationship is sacrificing themselves in any way to serve the relationship, that actually they end up depleting not only themselves, but the relationship as well.
Yeah.
This is a really different way of looking at relationship.
Yeah. And likewise, if say the relationship, one of the members or both are extremely, self-centered and not setting energy into the relationship, that'll also deplete the energy of the relationship.
Mm-hmm. So interesting that you bring that up at the beginning of this, because there's a concept that you and I have been discussing a lot, one that was, really with me from the time that I was a little girl with my mom, and one that's become really powerful for you in conversation recently, which is about being selfish.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's probably a really good way to start this conversation off, because you just used the word self-centered.
Mm-hmm.
And self-centered by its nature is the way we would normally define selfish. And selfish is something that generally gets bad rap in the world, because when we're selfish, we're not tending to other people and we're seen as self-centered. But actually, being selfish is a requirement of being in a healthy relationship, isn't it?
It is. And I think I like the way we're breaking down this terminology, being, self-centered, selfish, maybe these different ideas.
So what's the difference in your mind's eye between self-centered and selfish?
I think in the context of self-centered is this idea that the entire world revolves around me. and that I'm at the center of it, and all these things have to happen for my benefit.
Uh-huh.
Whereas selfish could be more that there are times when I'm going to do something that is for myself, my higher self, and there will be times when I'm not doing stuff for myself. It's not a it's almost like self-centered is a state of being, where selfish is an action that we may want to take that may not be self-centered. It may be, listen, what I need to do right now is take care of myself if I'm going to have this ability to nurture my relationship, or if I'm going to have the ability to look after my kids in the proper way. I need to take a selfish act right now. So my, going back to our battery analogy, so my energy's full, my battery's full. Self-centered is, I suppose, it's a nonstop series of selfish acts.
So it's interesting. Even on some levels, I think the idea of being self-centered gets a bad rap too, actually. So what I heard you say is that self-centered is a little bit more of a personality trait, whereas selfish is about a way of being in terms of actually, I'm going to backtrack on that. Selfish is self-care.
The way we're defining it here, yes. Yeah. I think in the context of our conversation, it is right now.
I'm almost like speechless, because it's true that the way that we define terms really affects the way that we see people. And actually, I mean, I wonder what would happen if that's the way we define selfish everywhere. What if people are really just looking for ways to be able to care for themselves? And maybe we don't know how to do it so well, because we're taught that it's actually a bad thing.
Yeah, and in fact, I think if I'm honest, I think we're taught it's a bad thing. So many people put off the air of not being selfish, yet are self-centered, because our self-centeredness it's a way of thinking. It's a way of being. Although I may not be acting selfish, I'm self-centered in my thinking.
But because we all have egos and we all have personalities, I would imagine that if we are not actually taking good care of ourselves and really taking the time to tend to ourselves, that inherently we would become self-centered, because there's a self-preservation piece to it. And I think I'm probably confusing our conversation a little bit here, but I think it's actually a really important piece for us to be looking at, because we spend a lot of time judging each other. As people in our world today, we spend a lot of time judging our own behaviors and then everybody else's behaviors. And in truth, nobody wakes up every day thinking, I'm going to do a really bad job today. Everybody wakes up wanting to do the best they can with what they've got. But we're so often taught to tend to the world, to tend to the people in our lives, to tend to our jobs, to do the things that we're supposed to do to be successful or to be, good people. Never along the way, at least not in my growing up, was I taught to, other than by my mother as a role model, actually, was I taught to take the time you need to take care of your needs so that you can show up fully for the people in your life. That's not something that's taught to us ever, actually. And so, by our nature, it would make sense that we would become more and more self-centered as we go through life, because we need to preserve ourselves on some level, and we're not doing it in our interactions. Does that make sense?
It does. And it comes to this idea that our egos or personas are effectively survival mechanisms that are built up from our childhood and then follow us into our adulthood. And that, it's a survival mechanism. It's inherently self-centered. And it's actually one of our survival mechanisms, I believe, is to appear not selfish in a society. Because again, selfishness is seen as a negative trait. And I'm going to confuse it even further by saying selfish with a little s. So the things that are clearly for us, like taking too many cookies, or taking more than my fair share, or these types of things. These are sort of these these selfish acts that we tend to think about when we talk about the word selfish. But I think what we're talking about here is, am I taking half an hour a day to meditate? Am I getting enough sleep? Am I looking after myself so that I can show up in the world for the people I love and for myself? Can I be who I choose to be in this world?
Yeah, it could look like I'm taking half an hour to meditate, which, is important to you and I. And and I would suggest that it's actually an important thing for all of us. But it could be that I'm going to take half an hour to go and read a book in a coffee shop. I'm going to take half an hour to go and have a bath. I'm going to take half an hour, and I don't even know why we're stuck on half an hour here.
Yeah.
It could be 2 hours to go for a walk and ground myself. All of these things look like we're stepping out of our lives to care for ourselves. But ultimately, really, what they give us is the energy to be able to take care of each other
Yeah.
without losing ourselves.
Yeah, we're going back to this battery analogy in particular, we're talking about relationships today in particular. That if my battery's not full, I cannot contribute energy to the relationship in the way I want to.
In fact, if your battery is not full, by the nature of your analogy, you're sucking energy out of the relationship.
Yeah, and it might be like, some of these tendencies that we develop as survival skills, which look inherently unselfish, such as people pleasing or self-sacrifice or things like that. They're ultimately motivated by the ulterior motive of trying to control and get what we want, but in a around the back sort of way. And it's very unconscious. I think most people go out with the intention to do something nice, but again, if we haven't really looked at it and looked at ourselves, it's coming from this place of self-centeredness. What do I get out of this?
Yeah. So I think we do walk around very unconscious in our behaviors for the most part. And then as we start to wake up and begin to really look at ourselves, one of the challenges that happens is that when our witness wakes up enough, we start to really see ourselves. And that experience can be quite painful, right? Because we get to start to see the masks we wear. We start to see the behaviors that we engage in to get what we want. And that moment is a really powerful moment, because if in that moment we can meet these new awarenesses with consciousness, or I'll say it in a different way, we can meet them with the observer or the witness rather than the judge or the critic. We actually can invite them out of the shadows. And then we can look at them and laugh. And we can look at them and we can begin to see those very same masks and behaviors that we've been hiding so beautifully our whole lives in all the people around us, because we're all doing the exact same thing. And once we do that, we actually can take back some of the energy that we've been putting into those masks and begin to feed it into ourselves and then into our relationships.
Gurdjieff calls it awakening to the horror of the situation.
Yeah.
And then what
it feels like.
It is. And what happens after that is called the work. And it's the most important work we're meant to do in our lifetimes. But at first, that witness observer has to come in, and then you really see it for what it is. And then you go into the shock that, oh my God, I see how I've actually been acting from this very self-centered aspect my entire life. And it was required when you're a baby to get what you needed. It was required when you're a child. At some stage, we don't grow out of it, and we go on with this very self-centered way of seeing everything's about me, and we have all these maladaptive ways of trying to get what we want in the world.
And so one of those maladaptive ways that shows up is the wheel of sacrifice, which is, often actually really connected to women, but actually I think it exists for all of us, which is I'm doing for other people. I'm showing up for others. And I keep sacrificing what my needs are in order to tend to the kids, in order to tend to my husband, in order to tend to my friends, in order to tend to my work. And then all of a sudden, what I'm left with is no more vitality because I've drained it. My battery's drained. and a whole bunch of resentments.
And I would just add that I think it's, I think it's equal for men and women. And I think it shows up in the nurturing role for women more, naturally, not every woman. And it's more the protector role and the hunter role for men. And where it's like, I'm going out and I'm doing this, and I'm stereotyping here, so forgive me, but I'm going out and I'm doing this job and killing myself, working 8 hours a week, and nobody's appreciating me. And I'm totally spent and burnt out, and now I'm resenting everybody for it.
Yep. And it happens on the other side also. And so what we're left with are relationships that are actually quite empty, right? Because both partners in the relationship are empty, striving for some version of success or striving to fulfill some role that we think we're supposed to fulfill, but actually, for the most part, running from the discomfort that led us to wear the masks in the first place. Right?
Yeah. And I think that's like my observation is, with hindsight of wisdom and failure, this is where the majority of relationships start, with two parties coming into this thing, either taking on these specific roles and heading off, or sharing roles, but with the intent that the relationship's about the compromise between these two paths, and both parties off going down this road of the wheel of sacrifice in some way, at least in their head, because if we're self-centered, well, gosh, that's what we're doing. It's all about my sacrifice. And the resentment builds, the relationship gets no energy. And we have two burnt out people, a relationship that's at zero, and we wonder why relationships don't work.
And our show's over.
Yeah. But there's a solution, though.
But you sum that up beautifully. Yeah. And it's true. It's what happens. And I think one of the things that I want to move some of our attention to is this whole idea of self-sacrifice. Because there is really this idea that relationship is about compromise. Relationship is about sacrifice. You're never going to get everything that you want, and you're going to have to compromise and sacrifice in order to make a life together. And I don't think that's true. I actually think that that's why so many relationships, and you and I have experienced our own versions of it in our first marriages, but where relationships don't work because we end up giving ourselves away. We don't know who we are anymore, and our batteries are empty. And this whole idea of being selfish actually becomes really important, because if I can tend to myself in a relationship and you can tend to yourself in a relationship, then you will meet your own needs. I will meet my own needs. And then together we will feed the relationship's needs. It's not the way that we're taught to look at relationships, because what we're taught is I'm going to find the person that's going to fulfill all of my needs. And I'm going to look for that outside of me because I can't find it in me. And when I do that, nobody's ever going to make me happy, and no relationship is ever going to be satisfactory, because all I'm going to be doing is parasiting energy off of my partner.
Yeah. And what you've just described is again, it's this another form of self-centeredness. Yeah. I'm trying to get what I want. And in fact, we've talked about this idea before, that we don't really know anybody. And our image of that person is what we're projecting onto them. Well, when we're seeking something and we find somebody that's sort of like, we're starting to attract us, we start projecting everything we want from them on them. They may not be that person at all, but that's what we want. So we start projecting that on them. And that's what we see for the first little while until we stop seeing. And then we wonder why it's not working, because we've looked at this person through a lens of getting what we need. And we've not looked at the relationship as its own entity. And I think that's what we're introducing here. This idea of it's 1 + 1 = 3 is the relationship itself is its own organism. It needs to be thought of that way.
But what's required in order for that to happen is for both partners to be taking personal responsibility for their own batteries.
Yeah.
And that's something that that most of us don't grow up learning. Those aren't most of our role models. That's not what society has told us is important. And so it's starting from a place where, they often say you can only, the love that you have to love yourself before you can ever find the kind of love that you really want. And it's actually really true. That doesn't mean that you can't enter into relationship while you're learning to love yourself. I think that happens for many of us. But it does mean that we need to take personal responsibility for ourselves in relationship if we're going to be able to create that third entity versus just being a drain on the people that we engage with, right?
Yeah, and I would even add to that again in this dynamic. It's we need to take responsibility for taking care of our own needs, but also I think it requires an encouragement through that relationship dynamic to encourage our partners to be able to look after their own needs and certainly support them when they're choosing to do that, but encourage them when we see them not doing that.
Mm-hmm. So, I'm listening to both of us speak, and this is how you and I do relationship. But it's taken us, over 40 years, over 50 years on your, well, actually, I'm 50 now too.
Yeah.
It's taken us over 50 years to get here. And even just the idea of encouraging your partner to take care of their own needs, even if that means that your needs aren't being met, and the like, that's really challenging for a lot of people in relationship when they're feeling like their needs are not being met to begin with, and they're already on empty. So where do we begin?
Well, there is it a requirement that somebody else meets our needs?
No, absolutely not.
Right.
But that's what we're breaking down. But for our listeners, we're talking about something that sounds amazing. I think it does anyways. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's relatable, because that's not the experience. It certainly wasn't my experience in my first marriage.
Right.
It wasn't my experience in most of my relationships. So how did we get here? Let's start there.
Right. Do you want me to start?
Yeah.
I mean, through failed attempts, and through by the grace of God, learning from those failures. And I come from an addiction and alcoholism background, so I went through a program of recovery. And why this is relevant for this conversation is if we're talking about this idea that we're all inherently self-centered as a survival mechanism, what alcoholism and addiction is, it's self-centeredness on steroids. It's like it's running that to the extremes. And so the process of recovery, and I'm referring to it, the various 12-step programs out there that I found successful. It's effectively 12 steps of becoming not losing your self-centeredness and becoming other-centered. And one of the key components within this is first the work we're talking about. We're looking at ourselves from an observer standpoint, trying to understand what's my way of being in the world, and recognizing that, yeah, okay, I am admitting I am been really self-centered my whole life. Here are all the things I'm doing that have been self-centered that I have tried to pretend are not, like my people pleasing or whatever it may be. And I think, to try to simplify this sense, one of the sayings we have, and certainly one of the things I do, is I can judge by how self-centered I am and how focused I am on others by how many resentments I hold. And I joke around, there's an exact formula that I give people I work with about resentments. It's your age times the number of relationships you've been in times 0. Don't have any resentments. The right number of resentments is 0, because those are a very self-centered view of the world, in that you're expecting something from somebody else with resentment.
So I want to make this real,
yeah,
for our listeners. You just went away. on a boys' trip, which is actually part of the reason why we wanted to do this, have this conversation to begin with. You went away on a boys' trip, and I was sick the day before you were leaving. I was in the hospital. And you went away, and that evening I was going to bed at like 10:30 or 11, and I hadn't heard from you. And I was feeling pretty hurt. And I could feel resentment starting to build. And so I sent you a text and said, doesn't matter exactly what I said, but I sent you a text and said, I'm recognizing that I'm starting to feel resentments. And we said no resentments. So this is how I feel. And this is what I need moving forward in order to feed our relationship. How did that land for you?
How did that land for me? I mean, I think when I first read that, I had that pang of guilt that I disappointed you, in the sense that I'd gotten busy. We got there, we're going to the grocery store, doing all the stuff, getting the place unpacked, having dinner. By the time I got to my room and had some quiet time, it was late and you'd gone to bed. So you'd been on my mind the whole time because you'd been sick, and I just hadn't had a chance to reach out to you. And I recognized that, gosh, I should have. That was a little bit inconsiderate. I was being self-centered at the time, and I hadn't reached out. But I appreciated the fact that you were sharing that resentment with me. So I simply apologized and said, hey, I screwed up today. I'm going to try to do better next time.
And how does that feed the 1 + 1 = 3 kind of thing that we're talking about?
Right. It's this, that's a great question. So you expressed feeling you were having about not being considered. And instead of projecting it on me and making me bad, you expressed it in the context of our relationship. Instead of taking it personally, that you're making me responsible for how you feel, I looked at it, the context of the relationship was, okay, I feel like I should have done better, but I was doing the best I can. But how Jacqueline feels is important to the relationships. So I want to do something to try to improve upon that. So we both went through the construct of the relationship.
So I'm using that as an example because in the past that would have created a rift or drama. And I was really conscious about how I approached you, and you were very conscious about how you came back. And at the end of it, I actually felt like we were stronger from it rather than weaker, which meant that both of our batteries got charged.
That's right.
And the relationship got charged. And I bring that particular example up because you were talking about resentments. So in relationship, it's incredibly important that when we begin to feel resentful for something, that one, we sit with ourselves and ask ourselves the question, what need isn't being met right now? And actually listen to what comes up. And it may come up and make you feel really uncomfortable because there's a need that's not being met that you don't actually want to admit that you have. But once you've sat with it, to be able to then discuss that with your partner in a way that doesn't make them bad, but actually makes a request for the sake of your relationship to have them meet you outside of that place of each individual, but in the relationship itself is essential. And what actually can happen if both of you allow yourselves to not project onto each other is that you can create what you actually create is magic, because all of a sudden we start to hear each other and we have the capacity to begin to meet each other's needs. Each person in a relationship matters. And we have to first matter to ourselves. Because if we matter to ourselves, then we can begin to make requests of our partners so that we can matter to each other in relationship. And I think with that, we'll take a break and then we'll come
sounds
back.
Good.
Yeah. Okay.
And we are back. I'm going to pick up where you left off, Jacqueline, because what really dawned on me almost in that moment is this idea of, Werner, in this concept, this 1 + 1 = 3 dynamic, there's a decision to be made, a conscious decision to be made at all points in time. Is what I'm doing, does it serve me, and does it serve the relationship? That's the conscious shift that leads to this type of relationship. And so if we go into the idea of resentment, well, a resentment doesn't serve me, and a resentment certainly doesn't serve the relationship. So it doesn't pass the bar on either of those things.
What does resentment serve?
Serves our ego.
Mm-hmm.
Ego wants to feel it's special.
Mm-hmm.
Ego likes to judge. Ego wants to be superior, and simultaneously wants to admonish those who doesn't live up to its standards. That's what a resentment is. And so if we're harboring resentments, it's not serving anything. I think there's a saying that a resentment is like drinking some poison in the hopes of someone else dying, but we're just killing ourselves with them. Mm-hmm. So a big starting place in a relationship is step back and do an inventory of resentments you might have, and be kind to yourself, because you might have a lot. If you're anything like me, before I started really paying attention to what I was doing, in the context of being in a divine union relationship like we're talking about now.
I'm just thinking about a conversation I had with a client this morning, and I think one of the things that comes up, I just completely lost my train of thought. You take it from here for a second, because I just totally lost it. Keep talking.
Okay. This throw me off now.
Sorry, I totally got thrown off.
Give me an example. So I think we talked earlier. Give me an example. Let's use an example of where that decision set comes in. Is what am I doing serving myself and serving the relationship? What shows up for you?
An example of what that looks like?
Yeah. And maybe an example of what it doesn't look like. Because I think this is where the rubber hits the road in this thing.
So I think perspective is really important here.
Yeah.
Because I could tell you the same example of what it looks like from one perspective, and then what it looks like from a different perspective. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and I actually think we shared this on this podcast a long time ago, but for a long time, I was harboring lots of resentments towards you, because we would get up in the morning, it'd be really early. Kids would be crazy all over the place getting ready for school, and I would be running around I'd be running around the kitchen like a chicken with my head cut off. And you'd be sitting on the chair reading on your iPad, totally in your own little world, while everybody else is screaming and all kinds of craziness is going on. And I could feel all of this anger building. And one day I sat down with you, and it took me a long time to actually ask you the question, but I sat down with you and I said, how can you just sit there while I'm doing all of this stuff? And why aren't you helping? And your response essentially was, well, because you're running around like a chicken with your head cut off, doing things for the kids that they should be doing for themselves. And I'm not going to have any part in that. And part of me wanted to punch you.
Me in the nose. Yeah,
totally. Yeah. But I sort of sat with it for a little while, and maybe even for a couple of days. And I was like, so you're not going to violate your boundaries to meet me in this place of crazy. Because on one level, for one, it didn't align with your values. Mm-hmm. And two, if you did, then both of us would be draining our batteries, and nothing would be able to serve the relationship. And had I not asked the question, I would have never known the answer. And I think in a lot of relationships, that kind of dynamic can exist for a really long time and build resentment over a lifetime. I think that's a great example. I think another example, which is a more vulnerable example for you, and maybe you want to share it, back at our old house. So one of my protective mechanisms, let's say, when I get upset or I feel hurt, is that I can put a wall up. And this particular day, my wall went up. I can't remember what our conversation was about. And you came to give me a hug, trying to melt the wall a little bit.
Mhm.
And I turned my back on you. And what did you say to me?
Yeah, I let you know in that moment, just so you know, I'm feeling shamed here for one, and also that when you turn your back on me when I'm trying to do that, it's going right into a fear of abandonment that I know is very very active in me, and it makes me want to run away. So I'm just letting you know that's what's happening. I'm not telling you have to do anything differently, but I want to share that's going on with me.
But when you shared it
Yeah.
with me, what you actually, in sharing that piece,
Mhm.
you said to me, "You're trying to hurt me." And I actually
Mm.
said to you, "I'm not trying to hurt you. I'm trying to protect myself."
Okay.
And had I known that what I was doing was actually creating that pain, I would have never done it. And so that's not what I do anymore, is it?
No,
Right.
absolutely.
And so there's this place where we take responsibility for ourselves by having to express the hard thing, which is when you turn your back on me, you actually trip my fears of abandonment. We would do everything to hide those things from each other.
Right.
Because that's how we've learned how to walk around with our masks on. And it's my mask relating to yours. But relationship requires a level of honesty that actually speaks to those deep needs or those deep fears. Because when we do, I've taken personal responsibility for myself. You've taken personal responsibility for yourself. And then we could feed the relationship. So my turning my back on you in that moment wasn't going to serve our relationship.
Yeah.
And it wasn't going to serve you. So why would I do it?
Because it was protecting you.
Right.
And yeah.
But would I continue to do it after I heard that? No. What happens now is I start to see where my walls go up. And I do what I need to bring those walls down because they don't actually serve a relationship.
That's
for
right.
me.
Yeah, and I think it's a great example because it also shows up. It's different than not wanting to disappoint, right? Like I can tell you doing something it's disappointing me, and that may or may not serve the relationship. But in that example, you looked at what was happening, and said, okay, my reaction to this now is it's not serving the relationship as a whole, so I'm going to change that action.
Yeah.
And the opposite is the iPad on the couch is you actually let me know it was disappointing you. And I'm saying, okay, well, I'm actually okay with disappointing you if it benefits the relationship.
Well,
that's fine. You can be disappointed in me. I can live with that.
But also, I'm okay with disappointing you if pleasing you actually goes against my values.
That's right.
Because if I go against my values, I'm not actually serving you or the relationship. But that's something that requires our speaking our own boundaries, right? And that requires us knowing ourselves a little bit. And there's no better mirror to know yourself in than the mirror of relationship. If we're willing to move into a place of exploration rather than a place of discharging our own discomfort and projecting it all over each other. It's a really big, it's a very different way to do relationship than the one that most of us had as, had modeled to us, and a very different way of doing relationship than what's really out there. I mean, most people that you speak to in relationships spend their time talking about their relationships by blaming their partners for their unhappiness.
Totally.
And in the end, they're draining themselves and the relationship. So, what would be your tools guide? What would be a tool that you could share with our audience to begin to work with this kind of idea?
Couple things, and just finishing off on what you said there, like what kind of just started thinking live here is most people, and certainly myself, if I look back at it, I was inherently self-centered and boundaryless.
Mm-hmm.
That was sort of the way I approached life and relationship. It's a bit of a hot mess when you say it that way, but I think that's actually that's actually sort of what we were brought into this world and end up with. Self-centered, but don't really know how to exert our boundaries because we're afraid of disappointing people and want people to accept us. And I think what I've moved into is a place where I'm actually more othered focused, but I actually have boundaries of steel in the sense that I recognize, and this is, the tools will get us there, But I recognize that the only way I can stay compassionate, empathetic, and other focused is if I don't allow my boundaries to get eroded and I don't have any resentments. So I'll enforce them very, very strongly if I believe those boundaries benefits our relationships, my relationships with other, my friendships. The boundaries come up, and it's coming up out of love.
Yeah. It's reminding me of challenges that we had with my daughter and rides. And you just like her asking you for a ride, and you were like, no. And I just kind of sat there gobsmacked, like, well, why not? And you said, well, it's going to take her 20 minutes to take the bus. It's going to take me an hour to get there and back. Why would I do that? And it was really hard for me to be in that and stay open hearted to you, because to me, of course you're going to do it. If you can do it, why wouldn't you do it? But it was really this, your boundaries are steel like, and it doesn't come from a selfish place from the standpoint of being self-centered. It comes from a place of, if I sit in traffic for an hour, I'm actually going to get really depleted, and it doesn't serve me in this moment. And ultimately it doesn't serve you, because you need to learn how to be independent and take care of yourself. End of story. But I had spent so much time justifying, and I can remember sitting in the car with my daughter on the way to school one day and actually having her, I think I was shrieking. I was so spent and I was getting so angry, and she just all of a sudden like fists down, and she screams at the top of her lungs, if you don't want to drive me, why did you say yes?
Yeah,
And
right
I was
there.
like, oh, right, this is on me, right? So it's like Byron Katie, who's a beautiful spiritual teacher, really, she speaks to this all the time. Like, if you're going to do it with joy and love in your heart, or don't do it. Right?
Yep.
And that's a boundary question. And that's it's an honoring of self question. It's a really important, in order for us to be able to be compassionate to each other and tend to each other, we need to be tending to our own tanks first.
Yep. And within that too, you can ask the question. It doesn't have to be a romantic relationship. Does it serve me, and does it serve the relationship? It applies to friends and kids and everything. And again, I'm going to use another driving story, because I distinctly remember this. We were on a long drive to the middle of the province, and we had Jude, our youngest, in the back. And we got into a heated discussion about the amount of driving that you were doing versus I was doing with respect to, taking the kids to school. And I thought Jude was sleeping. And I said, listen, it's more than just not having resentment. To me, I don't think it actually serves the kids to be driven everywhere. Because if I look back at my childhood, some of the greatest memories I have are going to and from school. I remember doing so many things with my friends in those trips. And if we're driving the kids to and from school and every day, they're just with their mom or dad in the car the whole time. They don't have this experience. So I think by doing too much driving, we're robbing them of these experiences. So I'm also saying no, because I don't think it serves them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You're good that way. And I've learned a lot about boundaries with you and through you from that standpoint. It was really important, actually. So let's get back to
tools.
Yeah.
Okay. I actually learned a new tool this weekend, actually. So I went away on the motivation for this talk, because I went away on a boys' weekend. This is a very different boys' weekend than we've done in the past. There was no drinking, not because people couldn't; people were welcome to, but it just wasn't on the agenda. We were busy doing other stuff, and I went away with a men from my men's group, which is a very different type of men's group, where I would say it's a group of men that are really interested in becoming better fathers, husbands, and people in their community. It's not like a business growth oriented men's group. And we have just these profound conversations that I didn't think were possible with a group of men. But someone brought up this amazing tool that I'd not heard of, called the Wheel of Consent. And that's in whatever's happening. You ask instead of saying, do I want to? It's a question, am I willing to? So instead of saying to you, hey, say I want to go see a movie, instead of going to Jacqueline, hey, do you want to go see this movie, which I know she probably doesn't want to go see because it's some sort of action film. I'll ask, hey, are you willing to go see this movie with me? And again, it's this is a tool that takes into account boundaries in a relationship, because it's much easier for someone to say, you know what, I'm willing to go see that with you. If you want to see that I'll go see that with you, and not feeling like I'm being tricked into it or have a resentment to going see a movie I don't want. Mm-hmm. So that's sort of one relational tool that you can use with your friends or anyone else. It's powerful.
Can I speak to another one?
Please.
It's just coming up for me in this moment, and I think it's a really important one, especially for those of you that have a relationship with your bodies, because our bodies tend to be quite wise, actually. And when we are in the habit of violating our needs, this is a really good way to be able to check in. And I can't remember the guy that taught it to me. He taught it to me a long time ago, actually, at a conference. But it's this whole idea of being able to ask your body over and over and over again, body, show me yes, body, show me yes, body, show me yes. And yes, it actually tends to be harder to start with. So you can start with body, show me no. And what you'll experience if you ask yourself that question out loud over and over again is your body will begin to show you what a no feels like. And often a no is constricted in different places, a dropping kind of energy. Whereas a yes will feel totally different. It'll feel more expansive and open. And if you can engage your body in that conversation, what you can end up doing is in relationship, when somebody says, will you go and do this with me? Will you take me here? Will you go on this trip? You can ask your body the question, say, just give me a moment or whatever, and actually begin to practice. Show me yes and show me no, and respond accordingly. Begin to trust the messages that your body gives you about what feels like a yes for you and what feels like a no. And we have permission. We need to be able to give ourselves and each other grand permission to honor ourselves. Because when we do, if I honor me and Chris honors him, then we have all kinds of gold to be able to bring into our relationship. But if I actually violate my own needs, I betray myself in relationship. Inevitably, I'm going to be leading myself down a path of resentment, and I'm going to cost myself and my relationship something really important.
Yeah. And what you're tapping into there is the other place that we can really have an impactful relationship ourselves in a relationship is personal responsibility. Right? It's like when I think so often when relationships run into trouble or they're challenging, both partners are looking at the other ones. They're not looking on their side of the fence, they're looking over there. They may even go see a marriage counselor with probably the idea that I'm going to try to convince this marriage counselor that the other person's the bad person. He's going to tell them how to change, and hopefully that's the plan. And often that happens. Many times that's actually exactly what happens at a marriage counselor, not all times. And what I would say is a good tool is to take a look at yourself. Take a look at it. It gets 1 + 1 = 3. That's that relationship is a combination of both your energies. Take a look at what you're responsible for, because you have 100% control over changing that, modifying, and altering that. There's almost next to no control of what your partner feels, thinks, or do. You probably don't even know them nearly as well as you think they do, but you're the subject matter expert on yourself. And begin to ask these hard questions. Maybe get someone to help you work through them, like a coach or a therapist or a mentor. What am I doing that's contributing to the volatility of this relationship? More specifically, where am I self-centered? Where are my actions really about me when I'm thinking about someone else? And can you start uncovering these character traits that maybe you have hidden from yourself that are contributing to what's going on in the relationship? And then after having done all of that and spending the time working on ourselves, then see what's happening to the relationship. And I think you'll be very, very surprised that everything's starting to change, including your partner.
So I couldn't agree with you more, but I think that there's like a peeling back of layers around how we can guide people into that process, because that process is a really hard process, right? That we spend so much time projecting on each other that pulling that projection back and actually sitting with yourself and looking at yourself can be incredibly challenging. It means feeling the discomfort that leads to the behaviors that have you project outward. It means being able, actually, in a lot of ways, I'm going to think about like a specific example. So for me, one of my major challenges from the time I was really little was ever admitting that I had any needs. Because I thought that if I had any needs, people would move away from me. And so I've learned how to be able to honor my needs and meet my needs personally. But to do that, I had to actually feel the neediness inside of me and accept it without judging it. And to be with the discomfort that that brought up, which was the terrifying fear that people would leave me. This work is not little work, it's big work. But when we do this work, what happens is that not only are we more tender and compassionate toward ourselves, but we also start to recognize that we become more tender and compassionate to our partners, to our children, to everybody around us. Because when we do that with ourselves, we recognize that everybody else around us is doing the same thing. And we're all working to be able to uncover those pieces, because when we can actually come into relationship fully. We can stop hiding the pieces of ourselves, and we can bring those into relationship along with all the things we love about ourselves. And then we can create space for our partners to do the same. But we need to create a safe place for ourselves first, so that we can then be a safe space for a relationship.
Yeah. And as we do it, I know we're running out of time here. Again, I really point out to people, be very kind to yourself as you start this work, and recognize that we're not conditioned, we're not trained to be in a relationship. We're inherently self-centered by nature. We didn't get the manual, we didn't get the playbook or taught how to be in a successful relationship. And it's trial and error and learning as we go. And we're going to make mistakes. And if you have the desire to shift things and you want to do this work, just start simple. Start with, as you make decisions, ask yourself, does this benefit both me and my relationship? And it'll take you a really long way.
And feel free to reach out to us if you have questions. I know that I'm starting a process again in January with people that has really helped me to do this work. And Chris and I are running another couples process to do the same. So if this is work that's interesting to you, feel free to reach out and talk to us. Okay. All right.
All right. That's a wrap.
That's a wrap. Have a good couple weeks.
Thanks, everyone. You've been listening to me, Chris.
And me, Jacqueline, on Break Free and Trust, a redesign for living.
Tune in every second and fourth Monday at 3 p.m. on Transformation Talk Radio for more real conversations about life, death, and everything in between.
Learn to connect with your intrinsic power to grow and heal. How to laugh at your own humanness and not take life too seriously.
Through healthy conversations between the feminine and the masculine, you will learn how to harness the power of relationship and the mirror to befriend your shadow, and to trust that any obstacle that gets in your way is there to help you grow.
For more information or to connect with us personally, visit theway-healing.com. That's theway-healing.com.